I feel like a lot of people have this idea that, talking to someone or pursuing connections is this humiliation ritual. And I feel like this is something that so many people talk about, so many people kind of spread such propaganda for it. And I think we kind of forget that rejection and embarrassment, all these emotions that go into these things are natural. These things are kind of a necessity. I feel like if you aren't experiencing these things, then when it comes to connection, I feel like you wouldn't know much. I feel like it'd be hard to understand and to actually value a lot of things if you didn't experience, any type of hardship, any type of, flaws. It shouldn't feel like that, but it is. And I think it's just because so many people are in their head. It's not an actual humiliation ritual. It's just people being scared to actually show themselves. And I think is what happens so many times. Pursuing connection shouldn't feel like a humiliation ritual. It's natural. And I think so many people are so in their heads and scared of being, actually seeing that they have this idea that everything's going to be embarrassing or that they can't, connect with people because they're so scared of being rejected, when really that is the whole point. It is being worth that risk. And I think so many people have made it sound so much more difficult than it actually truly is. If you want to have a relationship or connection with someone, you have to show that. You have to be willing to go out of your way to do this. This shouldn't be something that you are waiting or hiding to do, or that you're only going to do once someone does for you. It is actually showing that love. And I feel like a lot of times people are so scared of it. They have so much pride within themselves that they won't even go for it. They're too scared of actually having something good, and they will hide. And I think when we are trying to have relationships, it's only going to get more difficult as people are too scared to fail. That embarrassment is only natural in the course of making connections and connecting with people on a deeper level. And I think so many people are scared to, actually just experience that. And that experience is really something we need, though. If you're not willing to fail, like I said earlier, if you're not willing to fail and realize what's worth that risk, it's going to be so much harder to have relationships. And I think even speaking on relationships, they're flawed now too, because we look at having rough patches or having, memories or things that go wrong with someone. This is only natural. Having issues and talking to people and connections going one way or the other, this is something that's going to be, natural to experience. It's something that you are inevitably going to face. And I think we have to accept that. As much as we have to accept that having problems is something that we're going to deal with, we also have to understand that a lot of times we shouldn't be stuck in those problems at all. Having a relationship, you have to realize that your partner shouldn't be doing a certain level of things. And I think a lot of times our relationships aren't actually bringing us a lot of peace. And I think a lot of people are actually living within those problems and don't know how exactly to face it and how to even interpret that thing. You have to realize that having a relationship shouldn't feel like surviving, it's living. It's having an actual connection. And I feel like a lot of people are not realizing that their relationship is supposed to bring them peace, not problems. If you are only suffering and feel like your whole relationship is a rough patch, you're only staying with this person because of comfort or because of how long you guys have been together, that's not a real reason. We have to realize that a relationship isn't something that just dies down, it's something that evolves. You have to be actively pursuing your partner like you guys aren't even together as time goes on. And if you want to have a good relationship, that's something that has to stay. And I think a lot of people are so lost with that idea that they feel like, after a relationship, it's only going to be hardships, or that they're tied down, or that they can't do, all the fun things they want. Really, you're not ready for a relationship then. You have to realize that it's supposed to benefit you. You are now, providing for yourself while also having the support of another person. And I think when you are willing to take that risk, that definitely shows a lot of maturity. That shows that you are ready to have connection, that you are deserving of that thing more than anything. And I think when we want to have better for ourselves, this is something that we can look for, that we can take pride in, to understand that having a relationship is nothing that we should be ashamed of. It's something that's going to benefit us, only more into the future. And that benefit is something that so many people are looking for and so many people want. But again, it's the pride that gets in the way. It's the pride that gives us this feeling that maybe it's not worth it to go for these things, or that I shouldn't, communicate this or that, and really that watering down of yourself only makes it so much harder to find people like you, and when you're hiding that version of yourself, I think a lot of people realize that now it's going to be so much harder to find the people that are actually for you. The people that are looking for you can't find you because you're trying to fit in, or you're trying to have these things, even when you're asking for that, or feel like you're asking for too much. You have to realize that that's another person's version of perfect. You shouldn't have to water down yourself in order to feel comfortable. You should be able to be yourself. And I think so many people are kind of doing this and stuck in this mindset. the people looking for you can't find you if you keep hiding yourself. And I think people have hiding like how they feel in their connections. And I think a lot of times it's going to be so much harder to actually feel something with depth because you're not being true to yourself. You're not actually pouring your raw emotions and feelings into these things. And I think a lot of times when these people decide to walk on eggshells in order to make other people feel okay, it only gets harder to actually feel a real connection. You know, you're not going to feel anything real if you're only giving 40% of yourself. And I think so many people are doing this because they're scared of hurting other people's feelings, when we have to realize that that choosing of yourself, that's something that you have to do. That's something that's essential in order to feel good and to have an actual relationship. It's putting your priorities first, you know, and when you're able to understand that and communicate that with someone else, that's when you're ready to actually have a relationship and have that connection. I think so many people are scared of this, or that they don't want to be a bad guy, or that, you know, what they want isn't as important when really it is. You know, if what you want isn't important to anyone but you know, how are you going to communicate that? How are you going to have something that is, you know, so much more tangible and so much more realistic, you know? And that connection is very real to have. That connection within yourself is the first one you have to develop. And I've made videos and touched on this point, you know, a lot about choosing yourself and needing to have yourself in the sense. And that's still a very real thing. You know, that's something that we have to learn is, you know, what we're looking for. This is something that people have to accept, that is possible to find out there, that is possible to, you know, feel an actual connection and have a relationship with these people. And I think so many people are scared of how they'll be seen. And this fear, we have to realize that that fear that I keep bringing up, this doubt, is able to kill relationships so much faster than failure ever could. It can kill relationships, it can kill goals, it can kill connection, it can kill whatever it is, your own mission, your own career. That doubt is holding you back, you know. And I think a lot of times that comfort zone is the reason it's hard to do anything. You know, you're never going to experience anything new if you stay in that comfort zone. And I think so many people have stayed there for so long that they've kind of built that home out of it. And it makes sense to want to be comfortable. But at the same time, if you want to experience and have something that you've never had before, you have to do something you've never done. And that includes, when connecting with people, what you have done. You know, and I think pouring yourself and being transparent can be so scary. And it makes sense to think and to logically understand, you know, if it is worth it, if this person will actually see you, if this isn't a realistic option. You know, it makes sense to have all these thinking and ideas that go into it. But at the same time, if you're never going to do it, then you're never going to have that relationship. And I've talked about people feeling, you know, not ready to have a relationship, or that they aren't deserving of one. And this kind of can just transcend into a whole bunch of other things. You know, you are going to be stuck in this idea that you aren't deserving of a relationship for years to come if you still have this idea. You know, this idea is nothing but plaguing you. It's now hurting you and hurting your idea of yourself. And that idea means so much more than what you think. And I know I've talked about, you know, the potential and the idea of someone, and being infatuated, when really the idea of yourself is your perception of who you can become. And that perception needs to be aligned with the things that are important to you. You know, if you are willing to be open and feel that that dream version of yourself, or that person of yourself, is able to communicate and able to have, you know, such deep, complex relationships, you have to be willing to do that yourself. And when people are hiding that, or withholding that strength from themselves and other people, you know, it only gets harder for them to have actual connections. These connections are so important that I feel like people forget, you know, the whole point of life. You know, the whole point is having, you know, these moments that give you meaning. But at the same time, I've talked about how we are hardwired for connection. We are made for connection. I strongly believe that there's a natural, very real feeling devoted within us to form connection. You know, we're taught it as kids, we're taught it when we grow up in love stories and rhymes and songs about friendship, connection, companions, relationships, romance. All these things are taught to us not by accident. You know, it definitely is speaking to what is important. Those connections, you know, breaking out of this feeling of solitude is something that you have to do. That solitude can, you know, you might think it might be a phase, but really it's who you are now. And I think once you accept that maybe it's not a phase anymore and that you are harming yourself, you know, that's definitely when you have to take the time to understand that now it is time to break out of that thing. You know, you are looking for relationships and connections and all these other things that will provide you with so much more than what you're thinking. And we have to realize that. We have to be able to move on from that. And being humiliated and dealing with rejection is all a part of that process. It's only humiliating if you make it feel that way. And it doesn't help that social media tells you this or exposes people or says that, you know, failing or doing this or pouring your heart out is pathetic. No, that's being a human. That's actually trying to form something real. You know, when has it ever been, you know, not a very real or harmful thing to try and love someone? I think the more you honestly listen to the world, the harder it's going to be yourself. And it's very easy to be distracted by that and to get caught up in what we're told and what people feel like is important to us. But we have to have so much more for ourselves. We have to want more, and we have to understand that we are so much more capable of having that than we think. You know, it's possible to have these connections. It's possible to deal with being humiliated or being embarrassed or being rejected. It's all part of the life that we're supposed to live. It wouldn't be your life if you never had problems. And it wouldn't be a good relationship if you've never experienced hardships. And that's the most important piece. That's what you have to experience in order to have something beyond yourself.